Customers don't want big tech companies collecting their data and selling it to marketers. Yet, personalized, relevant ad experiences have never been more in vogue. Dealing with personal data is complicated. So what is a marketer to do? Are there any good solutions to the data conundrum today, or are we stuck just wishing for a brighter future? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and even flat-out lies, so join us as we slip anonymously out of the echo chamber and dive into data.
Hello, and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast. I'm Nick Smith, joined by Mr. Marketing, the daring do-gooder of deliberate data decision-making, Colin Jeffries.
Nick, how are you today? That alliteration might be a little bit grandiose, but I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate it.
It's a bit of a tongue twister, too.
Yeah, the daring do-gooder. I don't know. I feel a little like Boy Scout-ish in that title there.
Once I got to the deliberate data decision-making, that's a lot of D's in a short period of time.
This is true. Well, nice work on the alliteration this morning.
Thank you.
So, Nick, today's topic is really interesting because there's a lot of, hopefully all the topics we do are interesting, by the way, but there's a lot of conversation around the current state of customer data and the ideal future state of customer data. A lot of talk of decentralization and personal ownership and being able to have individuals choose who gets to see which data and all that. And I look at this through a couple of different lenses. One, which I know you're excited to talk about, is people get upset about the amount of data that companies have or rent or buy or borrow about them. But generally, we post a lot of stuff on social media that provides all of the access to that data. The second thing is there are some underutilized and maybe underappreciated options for marketers to, instead of targeting people based on their history or their specific demographics or their past behavior, we can actually just advertise to them based on their current behavior. So I'd like to kind of dive in there. Do you want to maybe jump in on the incongruence between sharing a proliferation of data and letting companies have access to that data?
Yeah, it's funny to me because, and maybe part of this even comes from my military background. I've never really understood the concept of privacy, especially when you're in the military, you're surrounded by a bunch of guys, you're so close quarters with each other. So privacy is not really something that I'm passionate about. And yet I run into people who are like incredibly passionate about it. And it's kind of interesting because some of these same people who are really passionate about privacy are sharing so much information about themselves on social media, right? And I don't know if they've read the user licensing agreement on social media, but
I would wager not.
Right. It's something to the effect of like, hey, we own all your data forever until the end of time. And so it's amazing to me how folks go out there and, you could buy a list of information, or you could just go do some really basic data scraping off of public sites like, hey, LinkedIn, I can find your company. I can find your job title. I can find how long you've been at the company. I can find all sorts of information about you. Who are your second degree connections, right? And so it's just kind of crazy to me how we give all this stuff away for free, and yet we get really scared that companies are going to own this data, or the government is big brother and they're watching me, So kind of interesting.
And there are a lot of regulations about what can be done with data, what data can be sold, who can get those lists, etc. But it's very easy to come by a very specific list if you have the right connections or if you are able to research the right company. And lists are cheap. You can get a strong list of very personal information for less than $1 per name. And that might include name, credit score, email address, phone number, address where the person lives, amount of debt outstanding. Like you can pick all of these layers to drop onto the list that you're buying. And that makes a lot of customers and potential customers very nervous. But we don't have a perfect solution right now where an individual owns all their data and they can select who opts in and who opts out and all that stuff. And candidly, privacy settings on social media aren't necessarily 100% bulletproof when it comes to quote unquote owning your own data. But there are a few things that marketers can do to be very respectful of people's data, especially as they go higher in the funnel. So the way that I look at this is marketing should definitely protect and own customer data for people who have engaged with them, hence the customer data, right? So if I go on a company's website and I want some gated content, I want to download a white paper or something, and I fill out my name, title, company, email address, etc., I'm totally fine opting into that and having that company own and protect and manage my data until such time as I opt out of their email database, let's say. But that's a little bit different than buying a prospect list or just saying, I want to target everybody in this DMA that looks like this, that has this past behavior, that owns this piece of equipment. If I'm targeting people that own jet skis or boats or trucks or you name it, right? That's different. And one way that we can, as marketers, get around that and really respect data is by using platforms that I would consider are zero moment platforms. So DuckDuckGo is a really good example of that. If I want to advertise on DuckDuckGo, I'm hitting people that are searching for one thing right then. I don't know who they are. I don't know any of their past search history. I'm not using analytics to figure out what their likely next search is going to be. I just want to know, hey, this person is searching for radiator fluid and I sell that. So I'm going to advertise to them there. I'm not going to collect any of their data. I'm not going to do XYZ just based on the fact that they're doing that search. So I think that's an option, is looking at what I would consider our blinded search engines, things that are not collecting any data and they're not really sharing any data. The other thing that's really a big potential opportunity for people who are passionate about data privacy protection is YouTube. And I know that's very counterintuitive because Google owns Gmail and Google Docs and they scrape everything and they advertise to everybody and they know everything about you because you have Google Maps on your phone and they're collecting all of your data. And that's true. But as an advertiser, I can say, I want to hit everybody who lives in this DMA that's searching for this thing on YouTube. And I can just serve video ads to those people, regardless of credit score, pet ownership, marital status, children's status, all that stuff. I can really hone in and just say, I don't care what they searched for. I don't care what they're going to search for. I care about what they're doing right now. And I'm not engaging in collecting and owning any of that quote unquote prospect data. I know those are two big concepts to kind of wrap our heads around, but the cool thing is we can experiment with them pretty easily and they already exist. We don't have to wait until 2030 when Web3 is fully built out and people own their own data and they can share it with us on the blockchain and they can remove access at certain points in time. Like, hey, these are available right now. And as customers demand more ownership of their own data and less renting out of their data and less selling of their data, but they still want those personalized ad experiences, those are two channels that I found that work pretty well. Anything you would add to that, Nick? I feel like I've monologued.
I'm just kind of curious, about some of the differences between maybe the European standards versus the American standards. Do you have anything that you think our audience would care about?
So GDPR is something that a lot of organizations are trying to get ahead of. Europe leads the US in a lot of situations, and this is no exception. No, I will say the US leads Europe in a lot of situations as well, not in data privacy. But you have various, and the interesting thing in the US is you have various states like California, for example, the regulations around data privacy, where you can collect it, what you can do with it, all that, are different than in states like Indiana, for example. A lot of organizations are trying to get ahead of that and replicate what's going on in Europe. Europe has some, and I am not a legal expert, so please consult your legal expert before you make any changes to your website. But you'll notice when you land on a lot of US domestic-based websites, they have some language that's representative of European regulation. Things like, hey, this site uses cookies. Here's what we can do with these. You can opt in and opt out of certain cookies. Those types of things, those types of disclosures and disclaimers. So I would say if we look to Europe, that's probably where the US will be trending over the next maybe 5 years, maybe decade. But historically, US regulators have been beholden to big tech companies in a lot of ways when it comes to policymaking. So rather than me as a small marketer waiting for Google or Meta or some other organization to say, hey, we're going to step up and really fix the data privacy problem. It's incumbent on us a little bit, if data privacy really matters to our audience, to let them know, hey, we respect that as well, which is why we don't engage on these platforms over here that are effectively taking your information and then renting it out to me or selling it to me as a marketer. Is that too high level?
No, I really appreciate that breakdown. That really helps. I'm also kind of curious because I think with um, typically in marketing, you're looking for somebody to opt in to something, right? And so, but with sales, I feel like most sales organizations I've run across, you don't really have necessarily that opt-in process for an outbound type of motion. Hey, for inbound, absolutely great marketing. We've got incoming leads, we got all this cool stuff, but in an outbound motion, typically you're reaching out sort of cold. And so in that situation, is there stuff that salespeople should be concerned about? Hey, picking up the phone and calling somebody who's never heard of you before, or sending them a cold email that you've scraped from a website or found through something like Hunter.io. It can be a little bit abrasive. Anything you would add to that?
Not necessarily. I think we're all aware of practices that tick us off and that make us go, oh, that's weird. For example, I got an email a couple of weeks ago from, it was a SDR, BDR, somebody cold reaching out to me, right? And they sent it to 3 of my email addresses. I don't know what list they bought, but they sent it to my work email, my personal email, and a student email that has been inactive for probably 10 years. And the funny thing is, I saw that and I was like, I wonder, did they buy 3 lists and merge the lists? And, some other factor like address meant that they sent it to all 3 emails. It seems kind of weird. Did they buy 1 list and I was listed on that list 3 times? And I started to kind of wonder, how did they get my information? And I think as an SDR, as a BDR, as a salesperson, or even as a marketer, if we're buying an email list, the last thing we really want is somebody to go, how did they get my information? Right? We want them to go, ooh, I do have that pain point and I should engage with this organization.
Mm-hmm.
So just thinking through from my perspective, and this is one perspective, so take it with a grain of salt. But if we look at it and we think, how would I like to be treated, right? The golden rule of email marketing, if you will. When I get an email, which emails do I respond to? Which ones do I ignore? And which ones creep me out and make me block the sender and, make sure that I'm opting out of future emails and those sorts of things. And oftentimes we can tell, right? I know this person found me on LinkedIn. That's fine. I put some personal information out there. And when people reach out to me, that's expected. This person buying a student email that's been inactive for a long time, very weird.
I love this topic because I think there's a really fine line between personalization to make something relevant and respectful versus getting creepy with it, right? And it's hard, especially for folks who are maybe just getting started out. It's like, hey, I really want to break through that noise. I want to capture someone's attention. And there's this idea around of combo prospecting, right? You want to touch on multiple different touch points, all kind of in a short period of time to break through the noise, but it can come off as really creepy. So I think in that example where somebody's sending something to your old student account from 10 years ago, you're kind of like scratching your head there, versus maybe if they had, I don't know, sent you an email first and, waited a day and then touched you on LinkedIn and then waited a day and then picked up the phone and called, maybe that's a little bit less creepy. What do you think?
I would say so. The nice thing about automation is that it gets rid of a lot of wasted time, right? So if somebody's in market and they get an email from you, then you touch them on LinkedIn, then they see some of your content on TikTok, and then you call them, that's great if they're warm-ish. If it's a cold outreach and the person's not in your target customer base, or they don't think that they are, then it leads to a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted effort. And I think that's the marriage between marketing and sales, right? Ideally, marketing is going out there and they're absorbing a lot of that wastage and they're passing the relevant people on to sales. And then they're nurturing all of the 95% of folks who are in the total addressable market, who are in the target customer base, but aren't ready to buy yet. And then when they are ready, they get handed over to sales. That, and this is a more of a conversation around data, but that makes a lot more sense from a data perspective, because somebody is engaging actively. They're giving you their information. You are then responsible to manage that, to protect it, to own it, etc. And then you can pass it on to your sales team when that person's ready to buy.
Yeah, I was interested in that balance between personalization and creepiness. That stuff is always the stuff that really interests me, because anytime where it's like you've got this kind of like gray area, the gray is where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. There's tension there. Mm-hmm. I mean, I used to work with somebody who was a YouTube influencer, and she would have people she didn't know mail stuff to her without her knowing previously, which means somehow they were finding her address and shipping stuff to her based on her YouTube content, which is kind of creepy. But when you get that free ring light or that free microphone or that free whatever, that's pretty cool. And so there's that balance of, I'm willing to absorb some of the creepiness because of the payoff. And what people are willing to put up with and accept is, I would say, kind of directly related to what the payoff is. So if the payoff is, I'm trying to sell you something and I'm trying to hit my number this quarter, and I'm going to be really creepy and overload your inbox with personalized custom emails that mention your dog's name and ask how your wife and kids are doing, that's probably too far. But I have seen very successful people who recognize, hey, we want to target this exact demographic. We're willing to give people this really cool payoff for 15 minutes of their time because we're trying to get in front of them and establish a relationship. That sometimes works really well. Anything else you would add to this conversation, Nick?
It reminds me of a book, and now I'm going to mess up the title of the book, but it was something to the effect of how to book a meeting with anybody. And they talk about, mailing off these different cool things, and I think the classic trope is, sending somebody a race car and then saying, hey, if you want the remote control for the race car, you're going to have to book a meeting for me.
Yeah, it's a little bit manipulative.
Well, it could be, or it could just tick people. If it's someone who loves RC, they're going to be like, heck yeah, I want to do that. If it's, kind of to your point, just something where it's like, I don't really want to meet with this person. Like, I'll just take the meeting to get the remote control. I'm not really going to listen. And now we've just wasted everybody's time.
Right. And are you just bloating your email database with people that are not even in your target customer base? Mm-hmm. Well, Nick, really interesting conversation today, talking about balancing privacy and productivity. It's really challenging to figure out, how do we reach the right people at the right time without violating any sort of privacy standards that people have in their own minds? And we can't rely on government regulation to really knit things together for us. In a lot of instances, it's incumbent on marketers, especially if we know that data privacy is important to our customers, to be transparent and to be straightforward with how we are collecting it, how we are buying it, how we are renting it, and then how we're using it. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Rethink Marketing Podcast, everybody. Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions. I used to believe a lot of myths that hinder marketing.
And I bought into the classic misconceptions haunting sales.
Join us as we escape the echo chamber each week to shed some light on how to interpret sales and marketing advice.
Can't wait until next week for another episode? Visit rethinkmarketingpodcast.com to listen to our archives, connect with us, or request your very own limited edition Rethink Marketing t-shirt.
Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.